Chapter 5, The Transformation of Eastern Europe, the second half of Unit 5 about absolutism. Today I'm going to talk about Section 23, covering 3 aging empires. Before we dive into Section 23, I want to give you an overview of this chapter. So this chapter is going to cover the decline of 3 political systems that failed to centralize and modernize sufficiently: Poland, the Ottoman Empire, and the Holy Roman Empire, and the rise to importance of 3 states that transformed themselves in major ways in the 17th and 18th centuries: Russia, Austria, and Prussia, which quickly came to dominate the region. In the same time period, Eastern Europe distinguishes itself in a more general way than Western Europe in that the personal freedom and economic opportunities of Western peasants did not cross over. The Eastern European peasants lost their freedom to an ever-oppressive serfdom, still required to perform uncompensated compulsory labor. The commercial revolution opened the doors in the West, but it didn't happen in the East. Instead, great lords running large agricultural estates engaged in commercial production and exchange and ruled their estates virtually unrestricted. The landlords, not the middle classes, were the most important. In fact, they were the only political class in Eastern Europe. All right, so first let's give you a general picture of Eastern Europe within the 17th century. We're talking about Russia, the huge empire of Poland, and then here is the Holy Roman Empire as of 1648. All right, so first essential question for this section is: why were the Holy Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and the Republic of Poland weak in the early modern period, and what characteristics did they all share? So, in the mid-17th century, the Holy Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and the Republic of Poland dominated Central and Eastern Europe. Each of these states was huge and quite different from each other in terms of religion, longevity, and connection to Western Europe, but all shared weakness of central authority, inefficiency of administration, and the inability to compete with the modernizing states of France and Russia. The Ottoman and Holy Roman Empires also shared ethnic and religious diversity. The situation in the East was fluid. Ultimately, 3 great states emerged out of the ruins of the 17th century states: the Austrian, Russian, and Prussian empires. So why was the Holy Roman Empire so weak? So the Holy Roman Empire had been devastated as a political entity by the Reformation and then by the Treaty of Westphalia. The empire strove for universality and not nationality, but in practice was nearly conterminous with Germanic civilization. The empire economically had a difficult time recuperating from the damages of the 30 Years' War, and it lacked most of the newly created economic attributes of Western Europe. There was no central bank, no colonies, no vibrant merchant class, no stock exchange, and no uniformity of laws, tariffs, tolls, coinage, or even the calendar, as Protestant states were slow to adopt the Gregorian calendar. Science was also at a low point, with the rare exception of Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, and only in music. So Johann Sebastian Bach did Germanic artistic creation excel. Politically, the empire consisted of hundreds, if not thousands, of virtually sovereign states of a great variety of size and power. Each wished to preserve what was generally known as Germanic liberties, and their opposition to Habsburg efforts at centralization was supported by foreign states like France, whose interests were largely geopolitical. The position of emperor was an elective one, and the Habsburgs did not have the rights of hereditary rule. And although all Holy Roman emperors were Habsburgs, each had to negotiate terms with the 9 electors, some of whom would prefer pro-French candidates. The imperial diet was similarly hampered. Along with the Germanic liberties came a lack of personal freedom and political rights. in most states within the empire. Most states tended toward absolutism, but often generated enthusiastic support from the local populace. The empire prevented internecine war or conflict. Some rulers within the empire sought to significantly increase their domains and their power, often by carefully selecting marriage partners, or by inheritance, or by peddling their positions as electors to the highest bidder. Often France was the highest bidder. Successful dynasties were the Wittelsbachs of Bavaria, the Hohenzollerns of Prussia, and the Guelphs of Hanover, who became the current ruling dynasty, and now this dynasty is called the House of Windsor of Great Britain in 1714 when the Stuart line died out. Two of these states, Austria under the Habsburgs and Prussia under the Hohenzollerns, achieved prominent positions and effective governments by 1700. Third question, why was Poland particularly weak? So Poland was a republic in the early modern period because its monarchy was elected, not inherited. It was a huge state and very heterogeneous in its population, having combined with the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and originally including the Grand Duchy of Prussia. The towns had a high proportion of Yiddish-speaking Jews who had been invited in by the King of Poland in the later Middle Ages, and of Germans, both of which tended to isolate themselves from the surroundings of Slavic people. There was no national middle class and not even a national language. They used Latin at this time. Poland's aristocracy remained inviolate in its rights, allowing the development of neither absolutism nor constitutionalism. They comprised about 8% of the population, much higher than elsewhere, and they were reluctant to share powers with native Poles. So there were only 2 Polish kings in the 2 centuries before the state's dismemberment at the hands of its more powerful neighbors in the late 18th century. One heroic Polish king was John Sobieski, who fought against the Turks in the 1680s, and that's who's pictured here. The Central Diet or Congress was weak, while the aristocracy ran matters from some 50 local diets because of the requirement of unanimity before any decision could be made or legislation passed. This was called the free veto or liberum veto, and any member of the Diet could cause it to explode or disband. The vast majority of the meetings of the Diet were exploded. The government failed also to develop a monopoly of power and force. This was discussed in Chapter 4. The nobility paid no taxes, and there was no national army or law courts. Aristocrats retained their control over armies and conducted foreign policies. Landlords acted like kings over their manors. The peasants, who were the vast majority of the people, became impoverished serfs, living in conditions that were close to American slavery. And East Prussia became independent of the Polish crown by 1660. Important towns like Kiev and Smolensk were acquired by Muscovy. Poland's inability to hold itself together was a key factor in the rise of Russia and Prussia. So how was the Ottoman Empire more successful in the early modern period? So first, this is the entire boundaries of the Ottoman Empire that we're talking about, and you can pause and take a look at the key to see which of these regions were added to the empire and when. So the Ottoman Empire was much larger than Poland, as we just saw, and the Holy Roman Empire, and it was better organized. The Ottoman Empire was built on military prowess, with a standing army, substantial artillery, and janissaries, soldiers originally of Christian background as the main striking force. By the 17th century, they were falling behind Europe in military organization and outfitting. Administrative leadership was placed under the Grand Vizier, a type of appointed chancellor. There was little interest in forced assimilation. Subject peoples were allowed to keep their religions and cultures. They were divided into religions groups, Armenians, Jews, etc., and neither forced or were subjected to proselytizing. There were very little conversion to Islam except in Albania and Bosnia. The Ottoman Empire was significantly more tolerant than most European states at the time. Outlying Christian areas paid tribute to the Sultan and had more independence. There was also no separation of church and state. For Muslims, laws derived from the Quran, and Sultan, who was a political leader, was also Caliph, which is the head of the Islamic community. The kings of France had many treaties with the Ottoman Sultan since the 1530s, so there were many French merchants within the empire who had the privilege of extraterritoriality and freedom of religion, and these treaties with other states then followed. Nevertheless, Turkish rule was seen as oppressive by Christians, particularly after the Sultanate became more corrupt in the 17th century. A strong family of Grand Viziers ruled competently for about 50 years and sent the Janissaries to war against the Habsburg Europe.